Hey everybody, welcome back to the Watch and Jewelry Bench. Today we've got a piece of work here. This watch is supposedly a problem watch that was under warranty. So we're going to take a look at it, find out what's going on. For some reason, the customer's complaint is that it stops at 1 o'clock. I'm not sure why. We're going to get in there and find out what's going on with this watch. Seems to be testing good. I'm going to tear down the watch and take a look inside. First thing I want to do before I do anything is go through and open up the back, test everything, make sure that the date advance is working, that the time is running, see if I feel anything, maybe a tight gear or something in there. And as I'm winding the watch, it is running, and I can feel that there's a little bit of friction, but not a lot. I'm not sure why there's a little bit of friction in there, so we're going to have to get in there and figure out what's going on. The other thing I want to do is check the hand settings and see if we can advance the time. You can see while I was playing with it, the minute hand came off. That could have been an issue, stopping the watch at 1 o'clock. This is an aftermarket dial after all, and it does have diamonds. They are a little bit raised, so you do have to adjust the hands to accommodate that. So once I've got that figured out, we're going to open up the back. We're going to take off the auto winding or rotor system and put that aside. So let's get that out of the watch. Put that aside so we can come back to it later. Now I'm just going to go through all the screws and just make sure that everything's tight. If a watch drops on occasion, you can have an issue where sometimes a loose plate can cause gears to kind of shift a little bit in and out of position, and that will often stop a watch from running correctly. So I like to go in there and just check for any damaged screws. Everything is tight, make sure everything looks good, and this watch is tight and is working well. Now, I did service this watch 3 years ago, so unfortunately it is out of warranty, so we're not going to deal with that. I am going to remove the movement from the case now, so I will tighten up these two case screws so that I can pull it out of the movement or pull it out of the case. Once the screws are loosened, I can pull out the crown and stem, adjust the position of the movement, so that it can pop out of the case. Different models have different slots for sliding them in and out, so you're just going to figure out where that screw hole slots are, and those case screws should just loosen up, and the watch movement will come out. Once that's done, I'm going to put the crown and stem back in the movement so that I can do testing, wind the watch, set the date and time. And that's pretty simple. You have a little detent there that you push in, push this crown and stem in, and it should seat automatically. So let's go and play with this. As I mentioned, the minute hand is loose, so we're not going to deal with that terribly right now. We're just going to kind of move on and see what happens here. First thing I'm noticing that as I'm advancing the time, the date's not advancing. So that causes me some concern because I'm not sure why. So here you can see I've gone around 36 hours now, and I'm just advancing it one more time, and you can see it's not advancing the date at all. So since we can't figure out without removing the hands and dials what's going on under there, we're going to do that now. We're going to remove the three hands, put those aside. I'm going to pop off the dial and take a look and see what's going on underneath the dial. The system for changing the date on the date wheel is all situated under the dial. So you can see the date disc that's in place, and I'm just checking the stem and making sure that it actuates correctly. And you can see it does advance the date ring manually when I do that. So that is a completely different system than the automatic advance. And I'm just doing a test, and if you look carefully, you can see above my thumb that the spring advance for the date is not turning. So we got to look at that and see what's going on here. And this is where I discovered that somebody's been in here before. And looks like a big problem. So this is the spring. This is the date advance spring here. This date advance spring works in a couple of ways. As this brass gear turns, it advances the spring. The spring actually contacts the date disc gear or teeth and will advance the date disc appropriately. So the first thing I noticed when I was looking at this is that the advance spring is actually placed on the watch upside down. Now, I know that 3 years ago when I serviced the watch, I didn't do that. So the actuator indent here should be flipped to the other side and fits into a slot on that brass disc. Now, there is a little pin that fits in this tiny little hole, if you look carefully, and that is the advance pin. This pin actually is what makes contact with the date disc. Logical next step is actually to remove this or flip it upside down. Since the pin is missing, I'm just going to go ahead and replace this spring. I do have a spare spring from a a parts watch that I bought some years ago. So I'm going to strip that down for the parts, and we're going to take that advanced spring off that other watch. So here I'm going to just pull off the screw here. It is a reverse thread screw, so if you do try to do this on your own, remember that is a reverse thread screw. I'm going to pull out the advanced spring, and we're going to put that aside. Just throw it out. It's no good. And we'll put the new one in the correct way. Now, the new one has a little pin on the side for the advance, and that slot fits in that brass gear perfectly. So once we get that seated, now I can put the screw back in. Remember, it is a reverse thread screw. We're going to tighten that down, and that'll hold the spring in position. There is, on a good spring and a good screw here, there is always a little bit of play so that spring can advance on its own, and it has a little flip effect. Whenever you change the date on a watch, on a quality watch, you'll hear a little click, and that's the date disc advancing, and that's the little spring effect that has. And as you can see now, as I turn the crown, the spring is advancing correctly. Sorry for the watch being out of position. So now let's get everything back together. Now that we know it's good, we're going to go ahead and do a test. I'm actually going to put the date disc back on. We're going to put the little click spring back on that date disc. You can see the little teeth on the inside of that disc, and that's what that little pin does on the advance spring. It contacts those little teeth and advances it. And then there's a little stopper spring that holds it in place. There is a washer or a C-clip that goes on that date disc. Don't forget to put that on. I'm just doing a test here, so we're just going to go ahead and do a quick test and make sure that the date advances. Once I'm happy with the fact that everything is working, we can go on and remove the dial, put that little C-clip back on, and go ahead and reassemble the watch. Here you can see I'm just doing a test. I'm turning the time, and I'm turning the crown, and I'm actually setting the time here because I want it to automatically advance, and there it goes. It's working perfectly now. That is a good sign. So that little advance spring was our culprit. I did go through the watch and do a little bit of an autopsy. Did find the little broken pin stuck to something, so I did remove that. It could have been flopping around in there causing us some issues. Now it's time to make sure that since the watch is set to midnight, we're going to put the hour hand back on, pointing to the 12 o'clock position, or in this case, the crown. Make sure you tighten those hands up pretty good. You don't want to push them all the way down. They need to sit above the dial and above where they can make any contact with any of the other parts. I've set the hour to 6 o'clock, and now I'm just putting it on the minute hand. And again, we're just going to point that to the 12 o'clock position and tighten that up. The second hand pinion is poking through that, so be careful if you go ahead and put your hands on, because you don't want to break that pin or bend it. It will cause problems. Once the hour and minute hand are set, we can go ahead and put the second hand on. Take your time. This is a very delicate piece. You don't want to damage it. And I don't know why I'm fighting with this, but it seems to be one of those watches that was just giving me an issue. So there's the second hand. It's on the pinion. We're just going to push that down gently and make sure that it is running. And we'll set the date and time. Just make sure everything is good. And now we'll check hand clearance for the hour, minute, and second hands so that they don't rub against anything. And we'll also check the hour hand, or I'm sorry, the minute hand, to make sure that it's not contacting any of those diamonds. Once I'm satisfied, I can go ahead and remove the stem and crown from the watch. And now we can recase the movement into the case. Again, you've got two case screws that hold the movement in place, and those go into specific indents on the case itself, allowing you to kind of just slip it in and then tighten it up. Once you get those two case screws lined up correctly, the movement's just going to sit down into the movement, and you can see just like so. And then we can twist it until we get it into the correct position. And I just need to get one more screw seated. Giving me a little issue here. Don't be afraid if you get that little issue. Just keep turning until it feels like it's gone and sunk into the movement. Once that's done, you'll notice that it turns or moves pretty easily in the case. Now we'll just twist that around, and we can insert the stem and crown into the movement. Again, you're going to line that up straight. What I like to do is just make sure that the stem and crown are straight before I go ahead and tighten anything. Once I do that, I'll insert the stem and crown into the movement, and sometimes I'll just screw down the crown onto the case to hold it firmly in position. I'll give that a quick test, make sure it winds and sets before I go tightening anything up. And again, I apologize for being out of focus. Now that the stem is in place, we can go ahead and tighten up the movement to the case with the 2 case screws. You're going to loosen those screws and they're going to put back pressure on the case against the movement. So that's what holds it in position. Go ahead and throw this on the timer. It did run good, so I'm not too worried about it. We did get the debris out of the watch, so I'm happy with that. It sets and winds correctly. The next thing we're going to do is just make sure that one more time before I move on to the next stage, we're going to go ahead and give this one more quick test. It's always a good idea to test while you're putting a watch back together because you can always find your problems easily if you have any. Once I'm satisfied with the date ring working and that the advanced spring is in good shape, we're going to go ahead and put the rotor system back on. And again, this is what winds the watch automatically. That little rotor flies around as you're wearing the watch. You'll sometimes hear them rotating around, and that's what winds the spring. You have to wind that about 100 times to get about an hour's worth of run time on the watch. So the more you wear it, the more it's going to wind the spring. And those, again, these are slip mainsprings on the watches. You can't overwind a Rolex watch, at least not a watch that was made since the mid-60s. Now I'm just going to go ahead and turn that rotor around, just make sure everything's winding correctly, everything's seated, there's no friction. Once I'm satisfied with that, we can go ahead and put the back on. I also marked the back of this watch with the notes that I have from what I performed this repair, and we'll tighten that up on the case tightener and put the band back on. Putting the band back on is pretty easy. You just want to slip those end caps into the watch case frame and then push the pins in so that they lock in position. Once you get one side done, the other side's pretty simple. And once that's out of the way, we're going to go ahead and run the watch for a day. Make sure that everything is copacetic. We know the watch is winding and setting correctly. I've also tested this to make sure that the advanced spring on the date disc is working still, and it is. So I'm just going to let this run overnight. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up. And if you're not a subscriber, please consider subscribing. Take care and have a great day.